Hi Pivot viewers, I'm Eamonn Neff. Let's get to it. In January of 2019, last year, my dear friend Chris O'Donnell invited me on a 2-week excursion of Iceland in January. And since I had not spent real time with Chris since high school 5 years prior, I jumped at the opportunity. Now, here's the thing. Chris is a young Bear Grylls. Even in high school, he was interested in hiking, in climbing, and in nature photography. And he used his college years to bolster his talent with these skills. I, however, used my college years to discover the joys of an infinite supply of cafeteria junk food, which left me extremely underprepared for the trials of an Icelandic winter. In fact, I was so underprepared that my girlfriend had to insist that I pack an insulated sleeping bag rather than my own sleeping bag, which was basically a paper sack from Albertsons. Despite my girlfriend's sage packing advice, I wasn't in Iceland for very long before I realized I was in over my head. When Chris and I first arrived in the Reykjavik airport, we hadn't slept for over 20 hours, but was Chris tired? Oh, no. He wasn't even slowing down. Immediately after we land, this guy goes out, buys us a rental car, buys us a tent, and we set off to discover the first of over 100 waterfalls that he has mapped out for us to visit in this 2-week trip. Now, when Chris and I went to sleep on a hard clump of ground that night, I was already a bit worried about the direction this trip was taking. I was achy, I was sore, and when I woke up in the morning, the roof of the fence of the tent was touching my face because it had snowed a full 6 inches during the night. Chris, of course, was infatuated with the opportunities that 6 fresh inches of snowfall presented for his photography, so he was a little more excited about that than I was. I reached my tipping point, or rather my breaking point, about 3 days into the trip during a night hike, which is a concept that I didn't even know existed until I met Chris. I was sweaty, hungry, bruised, and not even halfway to the crashed plane that Chris had insisted we find in the middle of the night because he knew that there wouldn't be any other tourists there to interrupt his photos. And we had chosen to do this despite knowing that at 8 a.m. there would be a free shuttle that would walk us on over to the plane so we wouldn't have to do this long hike on the beach in the middle of the night. But Chris wanted night photos, so we were going to get night photos. We weren't hiking long before I started talking shit to myself. Just stuff like, you're such a fat blob, you're being useless, and I'm just muttering to the slush that's melting in my shoe. That's who I'm talking to. Because Chris is ahead of me. I can see him waiting for me farther up the trail. He's got his foot on a snow-covered rock, he's wearing a massive backpack filled with tripods and lenses, and he's got a giant camera clipped to his belt. He looks for all the world like Jebediah Springfield standing in the middle of the field in The Simpsons. He basically looks as though he has the moon acting as his own spotlight. And it's right here that I just started to lose it. I'm asking myself, why did I come to Iceland? Why did I come to the country that inspired Dante's chilling thoughts on Hell's Ninth Circle? 'Cause I'm not even a fan of hiking, or photography, or ice. And I'm in Iceland. Why am I here? It doesn't make sense. So I'm kind of starting to freak out. But even before I can finish asking these questions and berating myself, I know the answer, because the real answer is that Chris had been originally planning on taking this trip with his girlfriend, but life doesn't always work out the way you intended, and they split up, which left him with an empty seat in his car. And I didn't, want him to be alone on this trip, so I agreed to fill that empty seat with my portly ass. All in all, every decision was on me. But you guys, here's the thing. Chris was completely right. That airplane crash site that night was one of the most beautiful things and fascinating things that I have ever laid eyes on. How many people get the opportunity to sit on the wing of a plane and look up at every star on this side of the hemisphere? We're not talking about standard stargazing either. We are talking about 3 a.m., no light pollution, sitting in the cockpit of a destroyed plane in the middle of a beach in an Icelandic winter stargazing. That is what we are talking about, and it is absolutely one of the most stunning things I have ever gotten to experience. The beauty and magnificence of that moment redefined the trip for me. My muscles loosened up, I felt more comfortable just suddenly, instantaneously, and the negative thoughts untangled themselves in my head and wove their way out. This one shift in thinking finally allowed me to breathe again. If I had been a fish out of water up to this point, I had flopped and gasped and panicked just long enough to throw myself back into the river. And once I was there, it was good to be breathing again. Situational acceptance is a powerful thing, and I'm glad I reached it. The rest of the trip was one of the best experiences I've ever had. We met and pet wild Icelandic horses that proceeded to bite the shit out of our rental car. We caught glimpses of the astounding northern lights. We soaked in naturally formed hot springs, which sit by alongside some of the most beautiful landscapes that someone could ever imagine. Oh, and yes, we did manage to hit all of the 100 waterfalls that Chris had mapped out for us, so I'd say that was probably the biggest accomplishment of the trip. All in all, I'd say if this taught me one thing, it's that any experience truly worth having, to make something really special, it has to start with some struggle, and with some level of discomfort, because that will allow you to form a truly exceptional experience. I'm Eamonn. Thank you for listening.